Hi, I'm Susan Rutledge, and in this video I'm going to show you how to use the Gradient Mesh tool in Adobe Illustrator. Whether you want to just add some shadows and depth to a flat object you're working on, or you want to go from a photograph to a lifelike looking vector drawing, this video is for you. I'm going to show you the 5 things I think are most important for you to know in order to use the Gradient Mesh tool, and then I'm going to give you a bonus which will show you how to trick Illustrator into placing the mesh exactly where you want it to go. So let's get started by moving to a blank document. I'll get the rectangle tool and drag out a rectangle. I'm going to give it a yellow fill and remove the stroke. Now, with the Gradient Mesh tool, there are 2 ways to add a mesh to an object. First of all, the object has got to be selected on the artboard. Then I move up to Object, down to Create Gradient Mesh. If this is grayed out, that means either the object isn't selected or you have an object selected that cannot accept a gradient mesh. The only one that I know of to this point is a text box. So this one isn't grayed out. I'm going to click here, and that opens up the gradient mesh dialog box. And here's where you tell Illustrator how many rows and columns you want in your mesh. Illustrator looks at the gradient mesh like it looks at a table. So we have right now 2 rows and 2 columns. All I have to do is scroll with my mouse to increase the number of rows, select columns, and do the same thing here. Everywhere that the horizontal and vertical lines intersect, we have a gradient mesh anchor, and this is where we actually add the color to get the shadows that you see. Now, you can add as many rows, as many columns as you want, but these anchors can begin to get in the way of one another. So I suggest you start out with fewer numbers of rows and columns, and then you can always add more. Let's look at these other 2 options. The appearance default is flat, which means there isn't any color added to any of the anchors yet. But in this pull-down menu, if I click to center, Illustrator automatically adds white to the center anchors. And this can be helpful if you just want a little highlight on one of your objects in a project. Then if I choose to edge, Illustrator adds white to all of the outside anchors. The highlight default is 100%. If I change this to 50%, you see how the highlight is much more subtle around the edges, and you can get some different effects that way. I'm going to change this back to 100%, change this back to flat, and let's go back to 2 rows and 2 columns, and I'll say OK. Now, once I say OK and close the panel out, I can't go back and use that for this object. So any more rows, anchors, columns that I want to add, I've got to do that with the Gradient Mesh tool, which we find on the left toolbar. But I'm going to start out with just another blank rectangle. So I'll come up to Edit and undo Create the Mesh. So let's come over to the Gradient Mesh tool now. When I click on it and pull away from the toolbar, my cursor has the little circle with the hash mark in it, indicating I can't do anything here, and that's because I'm out here on the artboard. But once I hover over an object that can have the mesh, my cursor changes. I have a little grid next to it with a plus sign, and that means I can now add some lines. So if I want a horizontal line, I'm going to hover over the left path or the right path, and wherever I click, Illustrator adds a horizontal line. Same with vertical lines. I hover over the top edge or the bottom edge, click, and that's where my vertical line is set up. I can also click on any one of these lines, and Illustrator adds a horizontal line intersecting with the vertical line. And if I click on an area that isn't an edge and doesn't have any lines, Illustrator adds both horizontal and vertical lines intersecting where I clicked. Now then, you know how to add lines, but what if I end up with a line that I don't want? Well, you can get rid of that as well. I'm going to hover over the line, hold down the Option key, and click, and Illustrator removes the line. If I want to remove both a horizontal and a vertical line at the same time, I hover over the intersecting anchor and press the Option key down for the minus sign and click here. Now, when Illustrator is working with an object that has straight edges, it gives us straight lines in our mesh. But let's see what happens when we use a circular object. I'm going to delete our rectangle, and we'll get the ellipse tool and drag out a circle, and then come back and get the mesh tool. Now the keyboard shortcut is U, and if you begin to work with complex designs, you're going to want to remember that, because you're going to go back and forth between the mesh tool, the eyedropper tool, which is keyboard shortcut I, and the direct selection tool, which is A. For now, I've got the mesh tool, keyboard shortcut U. Once I move over to the object, we see I have a plus sign. I'm going to start out in the center and click here. From the center, Illustrator gives me straight lines. But if I move closer to one of the edges where there's a curve and click here, Illustrator adds a line which pretty much lines up with this outside curve. So I have a curve at the top. Let's add one at the side, at the bottom, and on the left. And that's great as long as the curve is in the shape that I want. But if I wanted the curve to curve down instead of curve along the edge of the object, I'm going to have to reshape it. And the best time to do that is when you are starting out creating your mesh. So I'm going to get the direct selection tool, click on the anchor here, and I'm going to hold down the Shift key because it will allow me to drag straight down without moving to the right or to the left. So I start dragging and then I hold the Shift key down. The problem is that when I start dragging, Illustrator doesn't let me see where the mesh is. I hope that's something that Illustrator will change in the future, but for now I'm guessing where to put the anchor. Then as I release my mouse, we can see again where it is. Now the issue I'm running into is I wanted this curve to go all the way to the outside edge, but because I added this line, it's interfering with where this angle goes. So I'm going to have to remove this line here. I'll get that mesh tool, hover over it, hold down the Option key, click here, and click here. Now the angle isn't quite right yet, but I can still play around with it. We know that we can move anchors. The one thing I want to caution you about is don't move the outside edge anchors, because if you do, that's going to change the shape of your design. So let's undo that move, edit, undo move, or keyboard shortcut Command Z. However, notice that at each one of these anchors, when they're selected, we have handles. If you're accustomed to working with the pen tool, you're going to know how these handles work. If you're not accustomed to it, it's not hard. I'll show you here, but I'll also leave a link to a tutorial at the end of this video that shows you more about the pen tool. First, I'm going to move my anchor down a little bit more, and then we'll grab the handle here and drag it down and grab the anchor here and drag it down as well. And this gives me the curve that I wanted. Now, when I go back and add more lines, Illustrator will add the lines according to this shape when I'm close to it. The further I get away, it's going to begin reverting back, and you see how it adopts that shape again. So that's how you add shape to your lines. Now let's add a few more lines, and then I'm going to show you how we add color. I'll get the direct selection tool and I'm going to select just one anchor here in the center. Come over to the color fill icon and let's just turn that green. Illustrator places green right over this anchor, and you can see how it spreads out around the outsides of the anchor, but it doesn't come all the way to the next anchor. Now, if I wanted this color to spread out more, all I have to do is remove the anchors that are around it. So we'll get the mesh tool. I'll hover over this line, hold the Option key down, click here, and you see how the green is now bleeding out further to the top. I'll remove this line here, and now the color is spread out much further. So if you want just a little tiny piece of color, then you're going to want anchors around the outside of the anchor you're colorizing. And if you want the color to spread wider, just remove the anchors that are in a close proximity. Now that's working with just one anchor. If you want to add color to multiple anchors, get the direct selection tool, select one anchor, then hold the Shift key down, and that allows you to select as many anchors as you want at a time. Now, if these were closer, it would be much more difficult to select each one of those, and that's why I said start out with as few lines and columns as you can, because it can really get tricky. But I have several selected here. I'll come over to the color fill icon, and let's use this lighter green here. So that's one way to select just a few anchors at the same time. And then the other way I use a lot, especially when I have several different anchors that are right close together and I want to select all of those, I'm going to get the lasso tool and I'll come along here and draw along this outside edge. And I don't want to get that intersection there, so I'll stop, come up here, and come to the color fill icon, and we'll change this to a lighter green to give us a little shading on the outside edge. And you see how subtle that is and natural looking, and it's so easy to do. Well, now that I've covered the 5 things you need to know about using the mesh tool, I'm going to draw out a circle and show you how I created the circle that we used in the beginning example. I had this color right here, and we'll get the mesh tool. I'll add a line here, a line here, a line here, and I think there was a line about right here. Get the direct selection tool, then get the lasso tool. And I'm going to come right along this edge here and change the color to just a little bit darker, and then get the direct selection tool and I'll click right here on this anchor and change this to a lighter color to get a highlight. And that's all there is to that. Now, to get more complex, let me go ahead and get rid of this circle. I'm going to reveal my sample picture, and I've traced the pieces of this sample picture using the pen tool. And again, if you want to learn more about using that pen tool, you can check the video out that's going to be linked at the end of this video. Now, the first thing I'll do is select both of these pieces. I'm going to get the eyedropper tool and give them a background color, and then I'll select the stem, get the eyedropper tool, and choose this color here. You want to start out with a background color, then use the mesh to accent that color as if light was reflecting off of it. I'm going to start with this piece here. And I told you that for the bonus, I was going to show you how to trick Illustrator into placing the mesh where you want it. So let me show you why sometimes you have to trick Illustrator. Here we have the object that's been drawn out. When I come up to Object, down to Create Gradient Mesh, Illustrator does not give me the start of a mesh that I really want to use, and that's because there's not a specific centerpiece. So even though it's doing the best it can, it's not where I want it. So I'm going to cancel this out, and I'm going to make a pretend rectangle that has a center to guide Illustrator on where I want it to start. I already have what could be two sides of a rectangle. All I need to do is add one more anchor. To do that, I'm going to come to the left toolbar, click down on the pen tool for a flyout menu, and here's the Add Anchor Point tool, keyboard shortcut plus. So I'll just come from the left straight across and add another anchor here, then get the direct selection tool, and I'll select the top left, then hold the shift key down so I can select all of the corners at the same time. This gives me a pretend rectangle. And now when I come up to Object and choose Create Gradient Mesh, the center of my mesh is in a much better location, and I think I'm going to be able to work with that. So I'm going to say OK, then let's look at this piece right here. And this looks like a pretty good rectangle shape already. So I'll select the top left, hold down the Shift key, grab the top right, bottom left, come over to Object and click Create Gradient Mesh. I'll say OK, and I'm going to work with this just a little bit. I'll move this anchor down, and then we'll get a little bit of a curve here and curve here, and that's going to work great. Now for the stem, I'm not nearly as concerned about where the mesh lines are, so I'll just click to create the mesh and say OK. I'll start with this background piece, and I'm going to speed the video up because as I get more intricate, it takes more time. I just want you to see how the process works. I'm going to get the mesh tool and begin to add my lines and my anchors where I know I'm going to want some shadows. Then I'll get the direct selection tool and the lasso tool and grab hold of the left anchors, and we're going to make those white, and then grab hold of the anchors on the right, and I think I want those even a little darker here. And I'll click on this anchor and add the white highlight. That's looking pretty good. Get the lasso tool and come across the bottom and add some dark highlights there. And we'll go down this little edge here, add some dark highlights and maybe across the top here. Give that a little dark shading as well. There we go. And now I'm going to add just a little bit more. I'll select these anchors here and add some darker red. Then we're going to move to the other one, add my lines here. I know this is sped up quite a bit, but hopefully you can get an idea of how I'm grabbing hold of these anchors and just using the various parts of the photograph to highlight with the colors that I want. And come across the bottom, make that dark, lasso this top area. It's kind of tricky when they're close together like that. You can zoom in to get a better access to some of those anchors if you want. And let's get our highlight anchors here. Try that white, see how that looks. And then a little bit here in the center. And that looks pretty good. I've got to move this to the front, and I'm going to add a drop shadow. But I don't want it nearly that dark, so we'll back the numbers off and then grab hold of the stem, and just going to add some shading in a couple of places here. Let's do one more here. Bring that over, and then I want a little shadow along the bottom. Let's make this gray. Drop the opacity down, and I'm going to add a blur. And then I think I got the opacity too light. Let's bring that up a little bit and then move that to the back. I'm going to go ahead and stop here, but I could continue to fine-tune this illustration until it looked exactly like my photograph. It just takes a lot of time, and it does take some practice. But I do hope that you've enjoyed this video and learned from watching the process how to use the gradient tool, whether it's to add some depth and shadow to a flat object or to recreate a photograph into a vector drawing. I want to invite you to subscribe to my channel as well and click that notification bell so you don't miss any of my future tutorials. And I'm going to look forward to seeing you again next time. Thank you so much for watching. Bye now.